Before we begin tonight's journey, if you enjoy stories whispered from the edges of time, where history drifts like a dream and the past feels alive again, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your small gesture keeps this quiet corner of history glowing and helps our travelers of time find their way back each night. Now, let the world grow still. Let your thoughts slow to the rhythm of the river. Tonight, we return to Egypt, a land of gold and shadow, of gods and mortals, where a single woman's name would echo through centuries. Cleopatra. The night settles slowly over the ancient land, folding the sands and the river into a single breath. Night settles slowly over the ancient land, folding the sands and the river into a single breath. The air is thick with warmth and the scent of the lotus. Somewhere in the dark, the Nile drifts past like a ribbon of living silver, whispering to the stars. Lamps flicker in distant courtyards, voices fade, and the great city of Alexandria begins to dream. The sound of the sea murmurs behind the harbor walls, and the wind moves softly through palm fronds that have witnessed the rise and fall of kings. Inside a palace built from marble and light, Cleopatra is awake. She sits near a window, her fingers resting on a scroll that she has not finished reading. The flame of an oil lamp trembles in the still air, and its glow softens the lines of her face. She is young, barely more than a girl, but there is already something in her eyes that belongs to a ruler, an alertness, a weight of thought, a quiet defiance against the noise of the world. The servants have gone. The corridors outside her chamber are silent, yet she feels the heartbeat of the palace, the endless motion of a place that never truly sleeps. She listens. Beyond the walls, the river speaks in its low, patient voice, older than any dynasty. It tells stories of pharaohs and forgotten gods, of fishermen and lovers who came and went, leaving only ripples on its surface. Cleopatra has listened to that voice since she was a child. It comforts her. It reminds her that everything changes, yet everything returns. The Nile flows on. She stands and walks toward the balcony. The marble is cool beneath her bare feet. Below her, the city spreads like a constellation, temples and homes, docks and gardens, all silvered by moonlight. To the west lies the great lighthouse, the Pharos, one of the wonders of the world, its fire shining across the sea. Ships from Greece, Rome, and Africa rest in the harbor, their masts drawing dark lines against the night. Each carries a story, a hope, a cargo of silk or spice or rumor, and every rumor eventually reaches her. Cleopatra was born into rumor. The Ptolemaic dynasty had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, ever since Alexander the Great's general seized the land and crowned himself king. Her ancestors were Greek, not Egyptian, but they had learned to wrap themselves in the symbols of the Nile. They built temples to Isis, spoke to the priests, and wore the crowns of pharaohs. Still, the people knew. They always knew. Power had come from conquest, not birthright. It had been kept alive through marriages between siblings and cousins, through betrayals whispered behind heavy doors. Her father, Ptolemy the flute player, so called for his love of music, had ruled more with melody than with strength. He was charming, careless, and in debt to Rome. When he died, he left behind not peace but a struggle for succession. The crown was to be shared between Cleopatra and her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, a boy surrounded by scheming advisors. They smiled in his presence, bowed to his childish whims, and in secret plotted to remove his sister. Cleopatra knows all this, even now, standing on her balcony, watching the dark water shimmer. She knows that tomorrow will bring petitions and arguments, that men twice her age will try to tell her what she cannot do, but she also knows that she is her father's daughter, and far more than that. From the moment she learned to read, she devoured everything: poetry, medicine, mathematics, philosophy. She speaks 9 languages. She can converse with merchants from the Red Sea, scholars from Athens, and envoys from Rome without a translator. She understands that knowledge is a weapon more subtle and enduring than any sword. The lamp flickers. She turns back into the room to her desk. There are letters awaiting her seal, and a map of Egypt unrolled beside them. She studies the map, tracing the line of the Nile with her fingertip from the delta in the north, through the green heartland, to the deserts that cradle the southern temples. It is a living thing, this country of hers, To rule it is not merely to command armies, but to listen to the river, to the farmers, to the priests, to the pulse of the land itself. Outside, the first light of dawn begins to pale the horizon. In the marketplace below, the sounds of morning stir, a cartwheel squeaking, the call of a vendor, the bray of a donkey. Life returns, as it always does. Cleopatra closes her eyes for a moment, breathing in the smell of the sea and the faint sweetness of burning incense. The day will demand her attention soon, but for now, in this quiet breath between night and morning, she allows herself to simply exist, not as a queen, but as a woman looking out at her home. It is a dangerous home. Egypt is rich, and Rome hungers for riches. Across the sea, Julius Caesar's legions have made the republic a shadow of itself. Senators plot, and generals rise. The old order trembles. Cleopatra has heard the stories of Caesar's ambition, his charm, his relentless will. She does not yet know that their fates will intertwine, that history will tie their names together like two strands of silk. She only feels the change in the air, as if the gods themselves are drawing a new line across the sand. She walks back inside, her mind restless. The walls of her chamber are painted with scenes of Horus and Isis, gods of protection and rebirth. Their eyes seem to follow her as she moves. She wonders if they watch out of love or judgment. She wonders if they ever grow weary of watching rulers rise and fall. Sometimes she dreams that they whisper to her in sleep, urging her to hold fast, to become something greater than fear. Cleopatra sits again at her desk. She dips a reed pen into ink and begins to write. Her script is precise and graceful. The letter is addressed to the high priest of Memphis, asking for counsel on a new festival honoring the goddess Hathor. But beneath the formality of her words lies a quiet message of defiance, that she, not her brother's advisors, will speak for Egypt's heart. When she finishes, she presses her signet ring into the wax, sealing it with her symbol, the image of Isis nursing her child. A mother, a ruler, a protector. She studies the seal for a long moment before setting the scroll aside. Then she rises and walks toward the doorway. Two attendants wait there, silent and respectful. They bow their heads as she passes. The sound of her footsteps on the marble floor echoes softly through the corridor. The palace is waking. Slaves light torches along the halls, and the scent of fresh bread drifts up from the kitchens. Musicians tune their lyres in the courtyard, ready to play when the royal family appears. Cleopatra moves among them like a shadow of calm. Every gesture is deliberate, every glance measured. The guards who once dismissed her as a child now lower their eyes when she walks by. She has learned how to carry power, not to flaunt it, but to let it flow quietly, like the river outside. At the great hall, she pauses. Sunlight spills through high windows, painting the floor with gold. Statues of her ancestors stand in rows along the walls. Ptolemy I, the founder of the dynasty. Cleopatra II and III, queens who ruled through cunning and survival. Their stone faces look forward, eternal and expressionless. She wonders if they too felt the same mix of fear and certainty, the same awareness that the gods grant thrones only to test those who sit upon them. As she steps into the hall, courtiers bow. Her brother is there, surrounded by his tutors and ministers. He is barely 12, his crown slightly too large for his head. One of his advisors, the eunuch Pothinus, greets her with a smile that never reaches his eyes. The formalities begin. Reports of taxes, disputes among priests, messages from Roman envoys. Cleopatra listens, asks questions, offers solutions that are practical and fair. She speaks with clarity, with warmth, with an ease that makes the older men uncomfortable. They see not a girl, but a mind they cannot control. By midday, the air in the hall is heavy with tension. The ministers press for decisions that would favor their allies, and Cleopatra resists with calm precision. Each time she speaks, her voice carries the softness of silk and the weight of command. When at last the meeting ends, she bows to her brother, turns, and leaves. Behind her, whispers ripple like the wind through reeds. Outside, the sun burns white over the city. The streets shimmer with heat. Children chase each other through the alleys. Merchants shout in a dozen languages. Cleopatra's litter moves slowly through the crowds toward the harbor. She lowers the curtain slightly and looks out. Everywhere she sees the life of Egypt, its noise, its beauty, its struggle. She sees fishermen mending nets, priests blessing travelers, women carrying water in clay jars. The sight steadies her. These are her people. This is what she must protect. At the harbor, she dismisses her guards and walks alone for a while. The sea stretches to the horizon, endless and bright. She thinks of the ships that sail beyond her sight, toward Rome, toward Greece, toward lands she has only read about. For a moment, she feels a longing to follow them, to escape the weight of crowns and politics. But the thought passes. The Nile has claimed her. Egypt has chosen her. To leave would be to abandon herself. The wind rises, carrying the smell of salt and tar. A sailor nearby hums an old song, and the melody drifts to her ears. She closes her eyes and listens. It is a simple tune, one she remembers from childhood. Her father used to play it on his flute during festivals. The memory softens her face. She realizes how much she misses the simplicity of those days, the laughter, the music, the illusion that love could shield her from the world's hunger for power. A shadow crosses her face. When she opens her eyes, she sees a Roman ship anchored near the far pier, its banners snapping in the wind. The eagle of Rome gleams and the Sunday soldiers move about the deck with mechanical precision. They are far from home, yet their presence carries a promise. Rome watches, always. She wonders which Roman commander this ship serves, what messages it brings, what bargains it demands. She feels the future approaching like the tide. Cleopatra turns away and begins to walk back toward the palace. The streets are louder now, filled with color and movement. Children wave as she passes, calling her name. She smiles at them. Whatever the nobles may plot, the people still love her. They see her not as a foreigner, but as the living daughter of Isis, the protector of Egypt. She takes that faith into her heart like armor. When she returns to her chamber, the afternoon light has softened. She sits once more at the window, watching shadows lengthen across the city. The day is ending as it began, in the rhythm of the river. The palace hums quietly around her. Somewhere below, musicians play a slow melody on flute and harp. The notes float upward, delicate as smoke. Cleopatra breathes in and lets her mind drift. She thinks of the library, the vast hall of scrolls where scholars argue over the movements of the stars. She thinks of the temples along the Nile, where priests chant to gods older than memory. She thinks of her own place among them all, a young queen at the edge of a world that is changing faster than anyone can see. The first stars appear. She whispers a prayer not for power, but for clarity, for strength to hear what the gods are truly saying. The wind carries her words away, down to the river where they vanish among the ripples. The Nile answers only with silence, ancient and patient. And somewhere within that silence, Cleopatra smiles. She knows that this is only the beginning, that the tides of destiny are turning, that Rome and Egypt will soon collide in love and war. But tonight, she allows herself peace. The lamp beside her flickers low, the music fades, the queen closes her eyes, and the city exhales. Outside, the Nile flows on, whispering her name. Morning opens over Alexandria like a slow exhalation. The sea turns from silver to blue, and the first sunlight spills across the columns of the royal palace. Inside, the corridors fill with the scent of bread and the rustle of linen. The city hums softly at first, then louder, as if awakening from a dream it has carried through the centuries. Cleopatra walks through the courtyard garden, where papyrus reeds grow around a small pool. She moves without hurry, her fingers trailing lightly across the petals of a lotus blossom. Every step is measured, deliberate, part of the quiet ritual that begins her day. Above her, pigeons circle beneath the gilded roof beams, their wings catching the light. She is no longer a child. Months have passed since her father's funeral, yet the echo of the mourner's drum still lingers in her mind. The crown now sits upon two heads, hers and her brother's, but she feels the weight of it alone. Each morning she meets with tutors and ministers, listens to disputes, reads the endless reports from the provinces. Each evening she studies in the library until the lamps burn low. Knowledge has become both shield and weapon. The Library of Alexandria is her refuge. Beneath its domed ceilings, she walks among shelves of papyrus scrolls that hold the memory of the world. Scholars bow when she passes. They know the young queen by her curiosity. She asks questions that make even the philosophers pause. One afternoon, as the light slants across the marble floor, an old astronomer shows her a chart of the heavens. The stars move by divine geometry, he tells her. Each god has his place among them. Cleopatra studies the pattern, tracing a constellation with her finger. And what of us, she asks softly. Do we move by their design or by our own? The old man smiles. Perhaps both, Majesty. The wise learn to see the path and still choose how to walk it. She remembers those words long after the lesson ends. In the nights that follow, when the moon glows over the harbor and the city sleeps, she stands at her balcony and looks upward, searching for her own place among those patient lights. The palace around her is less patient. In every hall she feels the tension of ambition, the ministers who bow but plot, the generals who measure their loyalty against their advantage. Her brother's advisors whisper that Cleopatra has grown too independent, too bold for a girl of 18. They urge the boy king to sign decrees without her seal, to move troops without her consent. For now, he obeys them. They flatter him with the illusion of command, while Cleopatra watches in silence, learning the rhythm of their schemes. She answers them not with confrontation but with calm. When she speaks in council, her voice is low, even musical. Yet her words cut through argument like a blade through silk. She appeals to reason, to law, to the prosperity of Egypt itself. Some listen, others scowl. They cannot understand how serenity can be a form of strength. At night she confides in Charmian, the quiet handmaiden who has served her since childhood. They mistake gentleness for weakness, Cleopatra says, unfastening her jewelry. They think power must shout to be heard. Ganji, Charmian smiles. Then whisper, my queen. The wise will hear you. Cleopatra laughs softly. Perhaps that is the secret rule, as the Nile rules. It does not fight the stones, it flows around them until they vanish. The days slide forward like the river itself. Festivals come and go. The priests bless her name in the temples of Isis. Yet the shadow of Rome grows longer. Messengers arrive from across the sea bearing news of battles, of Caesar's triumphs, of debts her father left unpaid. Egypt owes gold, and gold is never given without strings. In the council chamber, Pothinus and the generals whisper that an alliance with Rome's rivals might free them. Cleopatra listens and says nothing. She knows that choosing sides too early is the quickest path to ruin. One evening she rides beyond the palace walls disguised in a simple cloak. The air smells of earth and smoke. In the fields outside the city, farmers bend over the young shoots of grain. She stops to speak with them, her voice low, her accent softened to match theirs. They tell her of the floods, of the taxes that press too heavily, of the hope that the new queen will remember them. She promises that she will. When she returns to the palace, dust on her sandals, the guards stare in disbelief. No ruler before her has walked so freely among the common people. Her compassion becomes legend and a threat. Within months, the court divides. Her brother's faction accuses her of undermining his authority. They claim she conspires with priests and peasants alike. One morning she wakes to find the gates of the palace sealed, her own guards replaced by men loyal to Pothinus. The message is clear. She is no longer welcome in her own home. Cleopatra does not weep. She gathers what servants remained faithful and leaves quietly through a side gate before dawn. The city watches her depart in silence, the queen stepping into exile, veiled against the rising Sunday. The desert waits beyond the fields, endless and merciless. Yet she feels no fear. The Nile accompanies her, winding through the sands like a companion of memory. She travels southward, toward Thebes, then east to the oases, where traders from Arabia pass with caravans of incense. In exile, she learns a different kind of wisdom. She listens to the language of wind and sand, to the stories of nomads who measure life by the stars. She eats simply, sleeps beneath linen tents, and writes each night by the light of a single lamp. Her letters travel secretly back to Alexandria, to allies within the temples, and to captains in the fleet. She does not beg for restoration. She plans it. By the time word reaches her that her brother's forces have seized full control, she is already gathering her own. Soldiers, still loyal to her father's memory, come quietly to her camp. Priests send blessings and gold. And then, one late afternoon, as the horizon burns with the color of copper, a messenger arrives breathless from the coast. A Roman general has landed in Alexandria, Gaius Julius Caesar, and the city trembles at his name. Cleopatra listens as the messenger speaks. Rome's civil war has followed him to Egypt. Pompey the Great, Caesar's rival, has been murdered on her brother's orders, and Caesar demands justice. The gods could not have written a more dangerous moment or a more perfect opportunity. She dismisses the messenger with calm words and walks to the edge of the camp, where the desert meets the river. The sun is setting, turning the water to molten gold. She stands there a long time, watching the light fade, and in that fading she sees her chance. The Queen of Egypt smiles not with pride, but with certainty. History has sent her a doorway, and she will walk through it. Night comes to the desert with a chill that surprises even the stars. The heat drains from the dunes, and the wind turns sharp, carrying the hiss of shifting sand. Cleopatra sits beside the small fire at the center of her camp, studying the flicker of its flame. Around her, soldiers murmur in low voices, their outlines softened by the glow. She hears laughter somewhere behind a tent, the clink of bronze cups, the restless cough of a camel. In exile, the sounds of life are simpler, truer. They remind her that power is not the marble of palaces, but the endurance of people who choose to follow. Charmian kneels beside her with a letter wrapped in cloth. "From Alexandria," she whispers. Cleopatra unfolds the papyrus and reads by firelight. The words are brief. Caesar is in the palace. He demands tribute and truth. For a long time, Cleopatra says nothing. The flames paint her face with gold and shadow. Finally, she lifts her gaze to the dark horizon where the Nile gleams faintly. "Then the gods have spoken," she murmurs. "I must return." At dawn, the camp wakes to movement. Horses are saddled, supplies loaded, banners furled. She dresses not as a queen but as a traveler. A simple robe of linen bound at the waist, a veil against the dust. Before they leave, she turns once toward the desert that has sheltered her. "You taught me patience," she says softly, as if to the wind itself. Then she mounts her horse and rides north. The journey to Alexandria takes 6 days. Along the way, the landscape changes from silence to noise, from the wide emptiness of the dunes to the crowded hum of villages that cling to the river's edge. Fishermen salute her when they recognize the royal crest sewn discreetly on her saddlecloth. Children run beside the horses, calling blessings. Word spreads ahead of her like the scent of rain. The queen is coming home. When at last she reaches the outskirts of the city, night has fallen again. The streets are tense. Roman banners hang beside Egyptian ones, uneasy neighbors in the wind. Cleopatra dismounts and studies the palace from afar. The torches on its walls blaze brighter than she remembers. Inside those walls waits the man who may decide her fate, the conqueror whose name already belongs to legend. But Cleopatra does not fear him. She knows the stories of Caesar, the strategist, the orator, the man who writes his own victories as history. She also knows that every conqueror is still human, capable of wonder, of curiosity, of being moved by something unexpected. She plans to be that something. Under cover of darkness, she sends a trusted servant ahead with instructions. An hour later, hidden within a rolled carpet carried through a servant's entrance, the exiled queen is smuggled into the palace of her birth. The corridors smell of cedar and lamp oil, exactly as they did when she left. She can hear the distant rumble of voices, Roman voices, deep and commanding. Then the carpet is unrolled before the general himself, and Cleopatra rises from its folds like a vision conjured from myth. Gasps fill the chamber. Caesar's hand, still resting on the hilt of his sword, freezes. He stares not at the trick, but at the composure of the woman who has stepped from it. Her veil falls away, and her eyes meet his steady, calm, full of the intelligence that has always been her truest crown. "Caesar," she says, her voice low but clear, "you sought truth. You now see it before you." The room holds its breath. Then Caesar smiles, the faintest curve at the edge of his mouth. "So I do," he answers. And Rome has never been so eloquent. That night they speak for hours. The language between them is a mixture of politics and philosophy, of caution and fascination. Cleopatra explains the turmoil that has divided Egypt, the debts her father owed, the ambitions of her brother's ministers. Caesar listens, pacing, asking questions that reveal both his suspicion and his admiration. When dawnlight touches the marble floor, an understanding has formed, not yet an alliance, but something close. Within days, Caesar declares himself mediator between the royal siblings. He summons Ptolemy XIII and his advisors to hear both claims. The boy king arrives furious, shouting that his sister has bewitched the Roman. Cleopatra answers only with silence. In the great hall, soldiers of Rome stand beside Egyptian guards, the air thick with rivalry. Caesar reads aloud the will of Ptolemy XII, naming both children as rightful heirs. But his tone leaves no doubt which heir he favors. Outside the palace walls, the city erupts. Pothinus and the generals rouse the mob against Rome's interference. Fighting breaks out in the narrow streets, torches thrown, homes burned. The scent of smoke reaches even the royal harbor. The war for Egypt has begun. Cleopatra remains in the palace, calm amid chaos. She walks through rooms where marble floors are strewn with maps and armor, where Roman officers argue over strategy. She learns their rhythms, their temperaments, their fears. Caesar, impressed by her composure, begins to seek her counsel. She advises restraint when others demand vengeance. She speaks not of conquest but of balance, of what Egypt can give in return for peace. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, her voice becomes part of the command itself. Weeks pass. The siege tightens. From the sea, enemy ships fire flaming arrows toward the harbor. One night, the great library catches flame, the scrolls that once contained the wisdom of centuries turning to ash in a single storm of sparks. Cleopatra watches from a balcony, tears standing in her eyes. "Knowledge burns faster than cities," she whispers. Caesar, standing beside her, says nothing. The glow of the fire reflects in his armor like the color of destiny. When at last the smoke clears, Caesar's forces hold the palace and the harbor, and Ptolemy XIII lies dead, drowned in the Nile he once sought to claim. Alexandria quiets under the weight of exhaustion. The war is over. The crown of Egypt rests on Cleopatra's head once more. But peace, she knows, is never free. In the silence that follows battle, she and Caesar walk through the ruined gardens. The lotus ponds are black with ash. Statues lie broken among the reeds. He speaks of rebuilding, of stability, of alliance. She listens, understanding what he truly means. Rome will protect Egypt, so long as Egypt remembers its debt. That night, in the candlelight of her restored chamber, Cleopatra writes again. This time, the letter is not to a priest or a general, but to the future. Let them say that I restored what my fathers lost. Let them say that I loved my country more than fear. She sets down the reed pen, looks out over the quiet river, and allows herself a rare smile. Power has returned to her hands, not through armies but through the courage to appear when the world expected her to vanish. Outside, the first stars bloom above the city. The people begin to sing again, tentative songs of gratitude and renewal. The Nile glides past, carrying its eternal whisper. In that whisper, Cleopatra hears both promise and warning. Nothing stays, nothing ends. She closes the window and lets the sound fade into her breathing. For now, Egypt rests. The queen has returned. Morning returns to the city like a slow tide. Smoke from the night's fires still drifts above the rooftops, but sunlight breaks through, soft and forgiving. The palace gardens are quiet except for the whisper of fountains rebuilt from the ruins of war. Everywhere, the scent of wet stone and new blossoms fills the air, as if Alexandria itself is exhaling after holding its breath too long. Cleopatra stands on the upper terrace, watching the harbor come alive again. Roman soldiers move through the streets, their armor flashing in the early light, while Egyptian merchants reopen their stalls, pretending not to stare at their conquerors. The uneasy peace feels fragile, like glass warmed by the sunday, yet beneath that fragility hums something stronger: survival. She has survived. Egypt has survived. And within the palace walls, another kind of history has begun to take shape quietly, beneath the gaze of marble gods. In the days after the battle, Caesar rarely leaves the palace. He walks the halls like a man measuring his next empire, studying the architecture, the people, the pulse of a civilization older than his own. Cleopatra often joins him, guiding him through gardens and libraries, explaining the symbols carved into columns, the myths painted on the walls. He listens more than he speaks. When he does speak, his Latin carries the rhythm of command, but his questions reveal curiosity rather than conquest. One afternoon, they stand together before a mural of the goddess Isis. The goddess holds a child to her breast, eyes calm, eternal. Cleopatra's voice is soft when she speaks. The Egyptians say that Isis taught us the meaning of loyalty, she says. She searched every corner of the world to gather the pieces of her lost husband. She made him whole again with love. Caesar looks at her, not the mural. And who restores the queen when she is broken? Cleopatra turns her gaze back to the painted goddess. No one, she says. A queen must learn to restore herself. There is silence between them, comfortable, yet charged. The wind moves through the open windows, stirring the curtains like slow waves. Caesar steps closer, his hand brushing the stone ledge beside hers. For a moment the world narrows to the sound of the fountain outside, the scent of myrrh in the air, the pulse that seems to echo in both their throats. No history book can record the exact moment when affection becomes something deeper, when admiration slides into desire. But in that quiet room, beneath the gaze of Isis, something shifts. It will change both of their worlds. That evening, the city celebrates victory with torches and music. From the palace balcony, Cleopatra watches dancers move through the courtyards below, their movements shimmering in firelight. Caesar stands beside her, wine in hand. He speaks of Rome, its streets, its senate, its endless appetite for order. She listens, imagining the city that commands the known world, a place of marble and ambition. You speak of Rome as if it were a living thing, she says. It is, he answers. It eats, it grows, it fears. And when it fears, it destroys. She tilts her head. Then perhaps Rome and Egypt are not so different. He smiles at that, a brief flicker of amusement in eyes that have seen too much war. Perhaps not. But tell me, Queen of the Nile, do you love your country, or does it love you? Cleopatra's gaze drifts to the horizon where the sea meets the dark. It depends on the day, she says. Sometimes it loves me like the sun, bright, generous, impossible to escape. Other times it devours me like the desert. But always, it is mine. He studies her face, the calm certainty in her voice. Then Egypt is fortunate, he says quietly. Music swells from below, flutes, drums, voices singing praise to Isis and to the queen who has brought peace. For the first time in many months, Cleopatra allows herself to breathe without fear. The war is over, but the struggle to rule will never end. For now, she lets the moment exist, as it is golden, fragile, fleeting. Days slide into weeks. Together they rebuild. Caesar orders the repair of the harbor, the reorganization of the treasury. Cleopatra oversees the temples, the grain stores, the schools. They dine in the evening surrounded by scholars and poets, their conversations winding from politics to philosophy, to the strange mathematics of the stars. She delights in challenging him, in matching his wit with her own. He delights in being matched. One night, after the others have gone, she asks him a question that lingers in the still air between them. When you return to Rome, what will they say of me? That you were clever, he replies. That you were dangerous, that you were necessary. Necessary, she repeats, tasting the word. That is not the same as loved. Caesar leans back, eyes half closed. In Rome, necessity is a higher compliment. Cleopatra smiles, but there is sadness in it. She knows he is right. Power does not leave room for sentiment. Yet power is what binds them, a recognition between two minds that understand the cost of command. In the hush that follows, she pours more wine, and they sit together in the golden lamplight, while the Nile moves outside like time itself. In the months that follow, whispers bloom through the city like vines. The people speak of the Roman general who stays too long, of the queen who has bewitched him, of the nights when music drifts from the palace until dawn. Cleopatra does not chase the rumors away. She knows that power grows through story. And the story of a queen and a conqueror is one the world will remember. Still, beneath the splendor, danger coils. Caesar's soldiers are restless. The Senate in Rome questions his loyalty. Envoys arrive carrying scrolls sealed with suspicion. Yet, whenever Cleopatra walks into a room, the tension softens. Her voice is calm, her reasoning precise. She speaks of alliances, of trade, of a future where Rome and Egypt thrive together. Caesar listens, and for a while, he believes such peace might be possible. But the world beyond the palace walls is not ready for peace. It never is. Morning spills into the palace through high windows streaked with dust and gold. The air smells of jasmine and parchment. In the throne room, Cleopatra sits beside Caesar while scribes read petitions from every corner of the kingdom. Farmers beg for lower taxes after the war. Merchants seek permission to rebuild their docks. Priests ask for silver to restore their temples. Caesar listens with his soldiers' impatience. Cleopatra answers with her scholar's precision. She explains the rhythm of the Nile, the flood that comes each year, the grain that must be stored, the people who must eat before anyone profits. Slowly, Caesar begins to see the land as she does, a living body that breathes through its river. When the council ends, he follows her into the shaded courtyard. The sound of the fountain cools the air. "You rule with logic," he says. "I expected prayer." She smiles. In Egypt, logic is a kind of prayer. The gods respect balance. He studies her as if balance were a new kind of power. In Rome, we worship victory. "Then perhaps that is why Rome never rests," she replies. They walk beneath palm trees whose leaves shiver in the light breeze. The conversation drifts from policy to memory, from philosophy to laughter. For a few steps, they are simply two minds speaking freely, freed for a moment from crowns and legions. That evening, Cleopatra hosts a banquet in honor of renewal. The great hall glows with lanterns shaped like lotus flowers. Musicians play soft chords on lyre and harp. Caesar's officers lounge on cushions, half bewildered by the luxury, while scholars debate the weight of the moon. Cleopatra moves among them like a current of calm. She wears a gown of pale linen threaded with gold. When she speaks, the room hushes. Even the Romans, men hardened by years of campaign, find themselves leaning closer, listening to the music in her voice. Later, when the guests are gone and only the perfume of wine and incense remains, she walks with Caesar along the terrace. The harbor glitters below, torches mirrored in the water. "Rome will call you home soon," she says. "Your Senate will not forgive a peace you made with a foreign queen." "I will return," he answers. "But I will return with order. Egypt must stand beside Rome, not beneath it." She turns to him. "And will you stand beside me or above me?" For the first time, he does not answer with words. He reaches out, touches her hand, an acknowledgement, a question, a surrender. The night gathers around them like a promise. Weeks pass. The palace becomes a place of plans. Caesar dictates letters to Rome, arranging laws that will secure his position. Cleopatra oversees the harvest, restoring trade along the river. Together they ride to the countryside, inspecting irrigation channels destroyed by war. Peasants kneel as they pass, calling blessings to Isis and to the Roman who travels beside their queen. Cleopatra feels their eyes on her and realizes that power has changed shape again. She no longer rules through fear, but through the belief she inspires. In late summer, the festival of the flood begins. Drums echo across the city as people gather to thank the Nile for its return. Cleopatra appears before the crowd, dressed as Isis herself, crown of gold, scepter in hand. Caesar watches from the steps of the temple, surrounded by his guards. When the people kneel, he sees the devotion that binds them to her. In that instant, he understands what no Roman conquest can give: the love of a nation that sees its ruler as divine. That night, beneath the fading drums, he tells her, "You command more than soldiers ever could." She smiles. Love is a more dangerous army. Autumn comes. The air cools. The sea turns restless. Messages from Rome grow more urgent. The Senate warns that Caesar's enemies are gathering. His victories have made him a threat. He must return to defend his power. Cleopatra listens while he reads the scrolls aloud, his voice heavy with fatigue. She knows he will go. She also knows that the story between them has only begun. Before he sails, they walk together along the garden paths one last time. The moon is nearly full, its reflection trembling on the surface of the fountains. When you return to Rome, she says, remember that Egypt is not a jewel to keep in your pocket. It is a flame. Handle it carelessly, and it will burn your empire. He nods. And if Rome forgets? Then I will remind her, she says, a trace of laughter in her voice. He stops and looks at her, at the calm strength that has carried her through exile and war. You already have, he says quietly. When dawn comes, the Roman ships lift their sails. The harbor fills with wind and sound. Cleopatra stands on the pier as Caesar boards the flagship. Neither waves nor speaks. The sea will carry him west to his destiny, and leave her with Egypt, with memory, with the child she now carries beneath her heart, the living bond between two worlds. She watches the ships shrink against the horizon until they vanish, then turns back toward the city. The sun rises behind her, bright and relentless. Alexandria stirs. Life continues. The queen walks home through the whispering streets, the Nile at her side, the future waiting like a closed scroll. Weeks pass after Caesar's departure. The palace feels larger, quieter, as if the walls themselves are listening for his footsteps. Yet Cleopatra has no time for absence. The kingdom demands her attention. The harvest must be counted, the granaries sealed, the new officials chosen. She moves through each task with calm precision, a rhythm that steadies her heart. The child she carries reminds her that endings are also beginnings. Each evening she walks the terraces where she once spoke with him. The wind off the sea cools her skin, bringing the smell of salt and papyrus. She imagines the Roman fleet somewhere beyond that horizon, and she whispers a blessing, half prayer, half memory. The city sleeps more peacefully now. Temples glow again with oil lamps. Poets recite new verses, and the hum of trade fills the markets. Egypt is breathing, and so is she. In the mornings she meets with her scholars in the restored library. The fire had devoured thousands of scrolls, but the work of rebuilding has begun. Scribes copy what remains, philosophers dictate what they remember, and Cleopatra walks among them, encouraging each voice. Knowledge, she says, is the only empire that cannot be conquered. The phrase spreads through the city until even the fishmongers repeat it at dawn. When her son is born, she names him Caesarion, Little Caesar. The priests bless him beneath the gilded ceiling of the Temple of Isis, and the people cheer until the sound fills the harbor. Rumor carries the news across the sea. The Roman conqueror has a son in Egypt. In Rome, the Senate grumbles. In Alexandria, the streets dance. For Cleopatra, the child is both joy and strategy, a promise that the lineage of Ptolemies will not fade. As seasons turn, she becomes again the axis of her world. Ambassadors from Greece, Nubia, and Judea kneel before her. She listens, bargains, grants, favor, and with every negotiation she weaves Egypt back into the web of the Mediterranean. Yet when night falls, the queen sheds her crown. She sits beside the cradle and hums an old song her father once played, a melody that drifts out through the open window to the waiting river. 2 years later, a messenger arrives from Rome. Caesar has triumphed again. His enemies lie defeated. He summons Cleopatra to visit him, to show the world their alliance renewed. The court buzzes with speculation. Some warn her not to trust the call of empire. Others see an opportunity. Cleopatra listens to them all and decides in silence. The journey will be dangerous, but her heart and her strategy agree. Egypt's future lies in meeting Rome on its own soil. The voyage takes weeks. Her ship, a floating palace of cedar and silk, sails north through calm seas. At night she stands on deck, Caesarion asleep in the cabin below, and watches constellations shift from the familiar to the foreign. When she reaches the Tiber's mouth, the horizon is lined with villas and olive groves. Rome rises from the hills like a living myth, loud, magnificent, and utterly unlike Alexandria's graceful order. Crowds fill the riverbanks to glimpse her procession. She wears a robe the color of sunrise and a crown of gold shaped like a lotus. Musicians play flutes, banners flutter. Some Romans bow, others whisper behind their hands, but all stare. Caesar meets her at the steps of his villa, his face lined by time and triumph. Their eyes meet, and for a heartbeat, the noise of Rome disappears. In the weeks that follow, she sees the heart of the Republic. Senators argue in marble halls, markets overflow with spoils of conquest, children chase chariots through the forum. At banquets, she listens to poets praise victory, to philosophers debate fate, and she understands that Rome is both brilliant and brittle, a world balanced on pride. Caesar introduces her as an ally, a guest, the mother of his son. The Senate endures it with polite fury. Privately, they talk of dreams, of bridges between cultures, of libraries linking the wisdom of East and West. If Rome learns to see beyond itself, she tells him, it could outlast the stars. He smiles at her faith, but behind that smile she senses fatigue. He is surrounded by daggers of ambition. Even she cannot protect him from envy. The day before his assassination, he walks with her through the garden behind his house. The air smells of rain on stone. If anything should happen, he says, remember that Rome may change, but knowledge endures. Keep Egypt strong. Teach our son to understand both worlds. She touches his hand. And will you remember Egypt? I could not forget it if I tried. The next morning, the city shakes with news. Caesar is dead, struck down in the Senate by men who called themselves saviors. Rome weeps, then turns to chaos. Cleopatra hides with her child until the storm of violence passes, then sails home beneath a sky streaked with gray. The river welcomes her like an old friend. When she steps onto the dock, the people kneel not for victory but for endurance. That night, she lights a lamp beside Caesar's likeness and speaks softly to the flame. You built empires, she whispers, but I will build memory. Years move like water. The world changes again. In Rome, power shifts to new hands, to Antony, bold and restless, the general who once fought beside Caesar. He writes to her from the east, seeking grain, ships, and alliance. She reads his letter in the quiet of her chamber, the candlelight trembling. History circles back, inviting her once more into the dance of love and strategy. She closes the scroll, smiles faintly, and whispers, so it begins again. Outside, the Nile breathes in its eternal rhythm. The city sleeps beneath the hum of crickets. Cleopatra stands at her window, the queen of a land reborn and a heart tempered by loss. The child in the next room stirs. The river whispers his name. Above them, the stars burn steady, indifferent and infinite. Tomorrow she will meet the world once more, armed with beauty, reason, and the memory of every night she has survived. The lamp fades. The queen rests. The Nile flows on. The year turns. The flood returns. The crops rise, and the river whispers as it always has. But Egypt is not the same. Rumors drift along the harbors like mist. A new Roman ruler commands the east, a man of charm and thunder, a soldier who laughs in the face of fate. His name is Marcus Antonius. To his friends, he is Antony. To his enemies, the tempest of Rome. Cleopatra hears his name before she sees his face. Letters from Asia Minor speak of him as half hero, half storm. He is said to drink with his legions and fight beside them. He is said to love music, women, and power with equal appetite. Rome trembles again, divided between Antony and the young Octavian, Caesar's adopted son. Cleopatra knows this struggle will decide more than who wears a laurel. It will decide the fate of the world that Caesar once tried to unify. One night, she stands on her balcony, the moon laid like a blade across the river. The air smells of wet earth and figs. Charmian appears beside her, carrying a sealed scroll. From the Roman general, she says. Cleopatra breaks the wax and reads. The words are bold, impatient. Come to Tarsus, bring tribute, or Rome will come to you. She lowers the scroll and smiles. He commands as if the Nile obeyed his legions. Then her eyes soften. Very well, let him see how a queen commands. The preparations begin at dawn. Carpenters hammer, painters gild the prows of ships. Musicians tune their harps. Cleopatra plans her journey not as surrender but as spectacle. She will meet power with wonder, force with beauty. Her barge becomes a floating temple, sails of purple silk, silver oars that flash like wings, incense curling from golden braziers. The deck is strewn with roses, the mast crowned with a banner bearing the image of Isis. When the wind catches it, the goddess seems to move. As the fleet drifts north along the coast, people gather on the banks to watch. Children run beside the water, laughing. Farmers drop their tools to glimpse the miracle passing by. Even the soldiers who guard the route whisper prayers as the queen's ship glides past. She stands at the prow, face lifted to the sun, gold dust on her skin, eyes steady. Every movement is deliberate, a choreography of sovereignty. When the fleet reaches Tarsus, the city is drunk on rumor. Antony waits in his governor's hall, expecting tribute chests and trembling envoys. Instead, he hears music. The river itself seems to shimmer. From the harbor rises the scent of myrrh and cinnamon, and through the haze he sees her ship, a living dream, sailing against the current. Citizens pour to the docks. Soldiers abandon their posts. The general of Rome walks to the balcony, shading his eyes. Cleopatra's barge glides closer. At its center, she reclines beneath a canopy of cloth of gold, attended by maidens dressed as sea nymphs. Her voice carries faintly through the air, speaking to her musicians, calm and unhurried. When the ship moors, she does not step ashore until every gaze belongs to her. Then she rises, tall and radiant, and the crowd parts like water. Antony descends the steps to meet her. For a moment neither speaks. The noise of the city fades. The river murmurs between them. He bows slightly, not from etiquette but instinct. "So," he says, half smiling, "Egypt sends a goddess instead of gold." Cleopatra's answer is soft. "Egypt sends what is owed, wonder." He laughs, surprised by her courage, and offers his hand. She takes it lightly, the faintest touch electric, dangerous. The meeting of queen and general has begun, and history leans closer to listen. That night she invites him to dine aboard her ship. The banquet is a dream woven from fragrance and firelight. Perfumed lamps float on the water. The table overflows with pomegranates, honeyed wine, roasted quail. Musicians play low melodies that blend with the river's whisper. Antony, who has feasted in 100 cities, finds himself wordless. He watches her pour wine, her movements slow as if the world itself follows her rhythm. "You use beauty as others use armies," he says finally. She smiles. "Beauty is only a promise. Wisdom keeps it." He raises his cup, then to wisdom and to promises. They drink. Conversation drifts from trade to myth, from politics to laughter. He tells stories of campaigns in Gaul, of nights under open sky. She listens, then answers with tales of the Nile's floods, of temples older than Rome. When she speaks, even the river seems to hush. Hours pass unnoticed until the stars lean close to the horizon. As Antony departs, he turns once more toward her ship. The lanterns still burn. Her silhouette stands at the rail, framed by light. He realizes that the world has just tilted, and that his heart, seasoned by war, has found something it cannot conquer. In the days that follow, they meet again and again. Officially, they speak of alliances: grain for Rome, protection for Egypt. In truth, they are studying each other, mirror and flame. Antony is bold, impatient, moved by appetite. Cleopatra, precise, patient, moved by purpose. Together they form a balance that neither could find alone. One evening, a storm breaks over the river. Rain lashes the decks, thunder rolls. Antony insists she take shelter in his hall, but she stands at the balcony, hair whipped by wind, watching lightning strike the hills. "The gods argue," she says. "They are jealous of mortals who dare to live." He joins her, drenched, laughing. Then, let them be jealous. And when the thunder rolls again, he kisses her. The storm outside is nothing compared to the one that begins within those walls. Got it. Before I go on, I just want to make sure you understand how this works. What I'm giving you is a fictionalized bedtime-style narration built from public historical facts. It isn't an academic or literal record of Cleopatra or Antony. Everything is written safely within that storytelling frame. When the storm passes, the river lies smooth again, and morning light slides through the mist like silver breath. In the stillness, Antony wakes to the scent of lotus and the sound of distant flutes. For a moment he forgets where he is, then he sees her, seated by the open window, hair loose, writing on a small wax tablet. He rises, still half in armor. "You write even before the sun?" Cleopatra looks up. A queen must write before the world begins to talk. If we do not shape our stories, others will. He smiles. Then write mine kindly. You'll have to earn that, she says. And her laughter rolls softly through the chamber, like warm water. From that morning forward, they are inseparable. They ride together along the coast, visit temples, listen to scholars argue about the stars. Antony marvels at how she draws people to her not through command, but through curiosity. He begins to measure power differently, no longer only by legions or tribute, but by persuasion, by grace. At dusk they share wine on the deck of her ship while the musicians play. The air smells of oranges and salt. Rome would never believe this peace, he murmurs. They think the East is endless war. Cleopatra's eyes follow the horizon. Perhaps Rome needs its monsters. If there are none, it invents them. Sibyl, he looks at her then, really looks, and realizes how solitude has shaped her, how each gesture hides calculation, how each smile carries memory. And what of you? He asks. Are you monster or miracle? She tilts her head. Both, depending on who tells the story. Weeks turn into months. The alliance is sealed not with parchment but with trust. Cleopatra provides gold and grain. Antony promises protection and partnership. They spend the winter together in Alexandria, the city glowing again with laughter and color. The Roman soldiers, who once feared the foreign queen, now toast her name. Festivals bloom along the riverbanks, feasts of music, perfume, and masks. Poets later call it the inimitable life. Two rulers living as if the world itself existed for their joy. In the evenings they dine beneath ceilings painted with constellations. Sometimes Antony speaks of Caesarion, the boy who runs through the halls like sunlight. He has his father's eyes, he says. Cleopatra nods, though she hears the hesitation in his voice, the weight of the name Caesar. Between them always lingers Rome, proud, suspicious, watching. When letters arrive from the West, Antony reads them aloud. Octavian grows stronger, the Senate grows colder. They call me reckless, he says. They think Egypt has bewitched me. Legend, Cleopatra answers quietly. Then let them think it. Better to be feared for joy than pitied for obedience. He laughs, pours more wine, and the sound echoes against the marble. But later, when the music fades, she sees the shadow behind his smile. Rome does not forgive joy. Spring comes early that year. They sail up the Nile, a slow procession of banners and song. At every village, people gather on the banks, throwing flowers, shouting blessings. Cleopatra shows Antony the temples of the old gods, the inscriptions that tell of pharaohs long turned to dust. Each ruler believes they will last forever, she says, tracing a hieroglyph with her finger. But the stone forgets the name and remembers only the shape. He runs a hand across the carving. Then let's make our shape worth remembering. At night they camp by the river. The air cools. Crocodiles slide through the reeds. The generals drink by the fire while the queen and her lover walk apart, barefoot in the sand. Antony speaks of Rome's politics, of the Senate's deceit, of Octavian's cunning patience. Cleopatra listens, storing every detail. She knows the battle is already forming, not yet of swords, but of stories. Then you must return, she says. Face him before he grows too strong. He stops and leave you? You won't leave Egypt, she replies. It will travel with you. He touches her cheek. And will you wait for me? I will build while I wait, she says simply. When he finally sails west, Alexandria feels quieter again. The people line the harbor, cheering his name, waving banners of gold and crimson. Cleopatra stands at the pier with Caesarion at her side. Remember, she whispers as the sails fill, Rome fears what it does not understand. So give it something beautiful to fear. Months pass without word. Then come rumors of victory, of marriage. Antony has wed Octavia, the sister of Octavian, to bind peace between their factions. Cleopatra reads the news in silence. The court watches her carefully, waiting for anger or grief. She gives them neither. Peace has many disguises, she says, and returns to work. Yet that night, alone, she walks the terraces until dawn, the river whispering a question she cannot answer. In Rome, Antony struggles with the bargain he has made. Octavia is kind, gentle, dutiful, but her eyes do not hold the Nile. He writes letters to Cleopatra that he cannot send, letters filled with memories of music, of storms, of the taste of figs warmed by Egyptian Sunday. When he sleeps, he dreams of her ship gliding through mist, her voice calling his name. History will later call it obsession. Perhaps it was simply homesickness for wonder. 2 winters later, he returns. The ships that bear his standards enter Alexandria's harbor under a red dawn. The city awakens in celebration. Bells ring from every tower. When he steps ashore, she is waiting, robed in white and gold. Neither speaks. They walk toward each other through a corridor of light. The crowd erupts, but the world narrows again to 2 faces meeting after too many nights apart. Rome sent you back, she says. No, he answers, my heart did. Morning drifts over Alexandria like a faint memory. The harbor, once crowded with banners and voices, lies quiet now, its waters dark as polished stone. In the distance, gulls circle where the great lighthouse still burns, the last steady flame of a vanished empire. Egypt has changed hands again, but the rhythm of the river continues, patient as breath. The palace stands half empty, columns cracked by battle-bare vines instead of torches. The courtyards bloom with weeds and silence. Yet the marble floors remember footsteps. The air still carries the perfume of lotus and cedar, a trace of the woman who ruled these halls with mind and music. Outside the city walls, workers repair the roads. Traders rebuild their stalls. Priests chant new prayers for the new masters. Life resumes, because life always does. But when the wind moves through the streets at dusk, people still look toward the palace. They whisper her name as if it might bring the stars closer. Cleopatra. Rome calls the country a province now. Octavian, soon to be Augustus, sends governors, tax collectors, architects. Statues of Caesar stand beside those of Egyptian gods, an uneasy marriage of stone. The language of empire mixes with the language of the Nile. Latin words echo through markets where papyrus still rustles in the Sunday. Yet beneath every decree, the people keep their own story alive. At night, fishermen on the river tell their children of the queen who defied Rome. They say her spirit rides the moon's reflection, watching over the water. Sailors leaving the harbor drop coins into the tide, murmuring for luck, for the lady of the 2 lands. Even in defeat, she reigns in the way only memory can't quietly, completely. In a shaded house near the temple of Isis, an old scribe named Meneket copies the last chronicles of her reign. His hands tremble, but his pen moves with care. We write, he tells his young apprentice, because forgetting is another kind of death. The boy asks what she was truly like. Meneket smiles, eyes bright with recollection. She listened, he says. That is rarer than beauty. He pauses to sharpen his reed pen, then adds another line to the scroll. She ruled not by fear, but by understanding. The words dry slowly, dark as river mud. Outside, the sound of hammers carries from the docks. The empire is rebuilding itself, but so is the legend. Years pass. The Nile floods and recedes, floods and recedes. New children are born who have never seen the old banners, but they still learn her name before they learn to write. In the markets, amulet sellers carve her face in ivory, crown tilted, gaze serene. In the temples, priests fold her deeds into hymns for Isis. She who united love and wisdom, and far away, in Rome itself, poets discover her too. They argue over whether she was seductress or scholar, saint or sorceress. The truth does not matter. What matters is the fascination. Cleopatra becomes a mirror for every imagination that looks into her. For some, she is the warning against pride. For others, the symbol of freedom. Even the emperor keeps a small bust of her in his private chambers, a reminder of both victory and loss. One afternoon, a Roman architect stands on the palace terrace, surveying the harbor. He is young, ambitious, eager to leave his mark. We will build new granaries here, he tells his local guide. The age of the pharaohs is over. The guide, an old man with sun-browned skin, squints toward the water. Is it? He asks. Look closely. The river still obeys her. The architect laughs, thinking it a jest. But when he looks again, he sees what the old man means. The sunlight catches the current in such a way that for a heartbeat it seems to gleam like a serpent's crown. The image fades, yet the young Roman finds himself silent. Some legacies do not require walls. At sunset, the sky turns the color of copper and honey. A lone musician sits near the ruins of the Queen's garden, plucking a lyre with fingers rough from travel. His song drifts across the empty fountain where lotus flowers once bloomed. The melody carries words almost lost to time. She walked where gods once walked. She spoke and the river listened. Her name is water. It remembers. The notes fade, but the silence afterward feels full like a held breath that never quite releases. In the cool of evening, Meneket's apprentice visits the harbor, now a man grown and scribe himself. He watches the ships of Rome sail away, their sails red in the dying light. He carries under his arm a copy of the scroll he and his teacher finished years ago. The ink has faded slightly, but the words remain. He unwraps it and reads aloud to the sea. Cleopatra, daughter of kings, keeper of knowledge, beloved of the Nile. She dreamed of a world without conquest, where wisdom ruled beside strength. The wind rises, lifting the ends of the papyrus. He rolls it again, tucks it beneath his robe, and whispers, "May the world remember." Somewhere out on the river, a fish jumps, ripples spread like the rings of a bronze bell. Night deepens. Stars scatter across the water. From the lighthouse, a steady flame keeps vigil. And if one listens closely, very closely between the hush of waves and the sigh of reeds, one might still hear a woman's voice, low and certain. Knowledge endures. Beauty endures. Egypt endures. The wind carries the words away toward the desert, where the sand hides the footprints of empires. Tomorrow, the city will wake to another sunrise, another story, another chance to remember. Seasons fold into one another until decades pass like breaths. Rome's banners rise, fade, and are replaced by others. But in Egypt, the river never forgets its rhythm. Farmers still mark the flood by the same stars Cleopatra studied from her balcony. Children still learn the stories in the same cadence she once spoke to Caesarion. Memory has learned to disguise itself as daily life. In Alexandria, the old palace becomes a museum of sorts. Marble heads and bronze coins lie arranged in neat rows for Roman visitors who want to look at history without feeling it. The tour guides tell them what to see: columns, mosaics, a faint trace of gold on the ceiling, but the guides are careful with their words. No one mentions the room where the queen read by lamplight or the fountain where she once laughed. Some stories are too alive to be exhibited. Among the visitors is a poet from Athens, thin and curious, who lingers long after the others leave. He finds an attendant sweeping the marble floors and asks quietly, "Did she truly die here?" The attendant shrugs. "Everywhere," he says, "and nowhere. She moved into the wind." That evening, the poet writes a verse that will later echo across the Aegean. The Nile keeps her heart beneath its mirror. Rome keeps her name upon its tongue. He never knows that Egyptian children will hum those lines centuries later, unaware of their origin. As the empire matures, Cleopatra becomes legend. Artists carve her likeness on cameos of glass, giving her features borrowed from their own queens. In Rome's theaters, playwrights turn her life into tragedy and spectacle. One actor paints his face with gold dust and proclaims, "I am the woman who drank pearls for love." The crowd gasps, half in awe, half in fear. They know they are not just watching history, they are watching themselves reflected in a myth. Back in Alexandria, a new generation of scholars copies those plays onto papyrus. Some translate them into Greek, some into the local tongue. The lines shift slightly each time, smoothing sharp edges, adding warmth where there was once judgment. Slowly, the conqueror's story becomes the conquered people's song. In a narrow street near the Serapeum, an apothecary burns incense each night before closing his shop. The smoke curls upward in thin blue spirals. His grandmother taught him that Cleopatra favored this scent, the resin of blue lotus, for clear thought, she said, and courage. The apothecary doesn't know if it's true, but he keeps the ritual anyway. When customers ask why he lights the smoke, he answers, "So the air remembers her." Across the Mediterranean, similar echoes appear. In a villa outside Naples, a Roman matron keeps a small bronze charm in the shape of a serpent. She tells her daughter it is for protection, but the servant who polished it knows the truth. The charm bears the faint engraving of a crown, 2 horns, and a sun disk, the symbol of the last queen. It passes from hand to hand, generation to generation, until no one recalls the reason for the gesture, only the comfort of doing it. Centuries turn. Empires fracture, reform, rename themselves. Sand buries cities, rivers change course. But beneath the layers of time, something persists. Travelers from distant lands arrive at the mouth of the Nile seeking relics of the past. They find fragments of glass, half statues, a single gold clasp shaped like wings. Each discovery sparks a new retelling. The queen becomes a pattern on pottery, a verse in a hymn, a whisper in the breeze before dawn. In a monastery, on the edge of the desert, a monk copies ancient texts onto parchment. His candle sputters in the wind. On one crumbling scroll he finds a name he cannot pronounce. He writes it again carefully, Cleopatra. He does not know she was flesh and voice, only that the ink feels heavy with meaning. He adds a note in the margin, possibly a goddess, the candle gutters. The name survives. When Arab scholars later rebuild Alexandria's library centuries later, they uncover fragments of those same scrolls. One describes a queen who spoke 12 languages and welcomed astronomers to her court. Another lists her formulas for perfumes and medicines. The scholars argue over whether she was scientist or sovereign, philosopher or magician. They agree on one thing only: her wisdom was rare. They copy her writings, preserving them under new titles, and in doing so, keep her mind alive under 1,000 tongues. And still the river moves, carrying silt and stories together. Fishermen mend their nets at dawn, repeating the old songs of the lady who listens. At night, the city lights shimmer on the water, and the moon hangs like a coin she might have tossed into the sky long ago. The poet's line returns, "The Nile keeps her heart beneath its mirror." In that reflection, century after century, Egypt recognizes itself not in conquest, but in continuity. Every time a woman walks the marketplace unafraid to speak, every time a child asks questions too large for his age, some fragment of Cleopatra's defiance hums in the air. Empires may rename the land, but the voice that once whispered across the river still finds its way into the wind. By the time 1,000 years have passed, the world has changed so completely that the old marble of Alexandria lies beneath layers of new stone. Languages mix like tides. Merchants from every horizon call the city home. Yet when night settles and the sea reflects the lanterns along the quay, sailors still speak of a queen whose spirit guards the harbor. They tell each other that when the wind shifts suddenly, it is her breath reminding them to respect the river. A historian from Byzantium arrives to study the ruins. He finds fragments of Greek inscriptions in the dust phrases worn smooth by centuries of wind. Philos, Basileia, Sophia, friend, queen, wisdom. He notes them carefully in his journal, thinking the words belong to different rulers. Only later, reading by lamplight, does he realize they once described the same person. He writes in the margin, "She is everywhere because she meant everything." That sentence will survive long after his manuscript disappears. In another age, merchants and scholars from across the Islamic world rebuild Alexandria's libraries. They copy the old scrolls into Arabic, giving the queen a new name that rolls more gently from their tongues, Cleopatra. They study her as alchemist, mathematician, poet. A philosopher in Cairo writes that she understood the harmony of opposites, the marriage of science and heart. He hangs her portrait above his writing desk, a small ink drawing of a woman seated beneath stars. Beninhumt. Travelers come to see it. One describes the eyes as curious, not cruel. Another says the face looks as if it were listening. Each leaves with a slightly different memory, and together those memories weave another layer of legend. Centuries later, the conquerors of Europe sail again to Egypt, hungry for relics and glory. They arrive with shovels and notebooks, determined to measure the past into maps. They unearth coins bearing her name, statues smoothed by time. Painters in Paris and London recreate her image in marble and oil, some serene, some wild, all imagined. To them, she is the eternal riddle. How could a woman rule the world's desire and still be called fallen? In candlelit rooms, they argue. Was she hero or ruin, saint or siren? None agree, but none can look away. Each new age remakes her, borrowing her face to mirror its own longing. The poets call her the last breath of ancient wisdom. The skeptics call her a dream Rome could not conquer. Both are right in their own way. Back in Egypt, the locals watch these foreign excavations with quiet amusement. When asked if they know where the queen lies, an old boatman shrugs. Everywhere, he says, echoing the same words spoken centuries before. He gestures to the river. You cannot dig for what is in the water. The archaeologists laugh politely and return to their charts. But that night, as the boatman rows home under the moon, he hums an old melody, a tune older than temples. The oars strike the water in time with the rhythm of her name. As the modern age arrives, trains whistle where caravans once crossed. Electric lamps replace torches, but the stories glow on. Filmmakers and writers rediscover her, their cameras and pens chasing the shimmer of her myth. Some paint her tragic, some triumphant, some impossibly wise. Audiences sit in the dark and watch her step again from the golden barge. Hear her voice rise above the music. Feel the same hush that Antony once felt on the river. What they don't realize is that they are adding their own reflection to the mirror. Each retelling polishes the surface until her image belongs not just to history, but to the imagination of anyone who has ever loved, ruled, or refused to kneel. One evening, in a small cinema by the Alexandrian waterfront, a young woman stays after the credits roll. The projector clicks in the silence. The screen fades to white. She sits motionless, eyes wet with something she can't name. Outside, the sea murmurs against the quay. She whispers to herself, she was real. And for a moment, she feels the air around her shift, as if the queen herself had turned to listen. The girl walks home through streets that glitter with modern lights. Yet every sound, the call of vendors, the laughter of children, feels threaded to an ancient pulse. She thinks of how people once feared that knowledge would burn away with the library. But here it is, alive in the glow of every doorway. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice repeats the old promise. Knowledge endures, beauty endures, Egypt endures. The night breeze carries the words down the alleys, across the harbor, and out toward the dark horizon. On the surface of the water, the reflection of the lighthouse trembles, steady and soft, like a heartbeat. Morning again, centuries after the crown and the empire have crumbled, and yet the same golden light falls across the Nile. Commuter boats replace the barges of priests. The call to prayer rises where temple songs once echoed. The city has changed names, rulers, languages, but the rhythm beneath it is still the same slow heartbeat that carried Cleopatra's ships. In the museums of modern Alexandria, children wander through halls of glass. They stop before a single gold coin sealed behind a thin wall of air. On one side is the face of a Roman general. On the other, a woman's profile crowned with the uraeus of the pharaohs. The guide explains in easy Arabic, this is Cleopatra VII, the last queen of ancient Egypt. The children press their palms to the glass, wide-eyed. To them she is not remote. She is proof that history once spoke their language. Across the courtyard, a curator adjusts the lighting around a broken statue. When no one is looking, he whispers a greeting under his breath, an old habit learned from his grandmother. Peace to you, Ya Malika, he says. Your city still breathes. The words vanish into the hum of the air conditioning, yet the feeling stays a quiet, inexplicable respect. Outside the museum, modern Alexandria moves to its own rhythm. Traffic horns, vendors calling, waves against the seawall. Somewhere in that noise, a young archaeologist walks home with sand still clinging to her boots. She has spent the day excavating the sunken ruins off the coast, searching for the lost palace beneath layers of silt. Each shard she uncovers feels like a heartbeat returned. In her pocket lies a small fragment of blue-green glass, once part of a perfume bottle. She holds it up to the streetlight. It glows softly, ocean caught in stone. That night, she places the fragment on her desk beside her notebook and writes, "The sea still keeps her secrets, but they rise when we listen kindly." Outside, The surf replies with its eternal hush. Across the world, historians keep writing. Filmmakers keep filming. Singers keep shaping her name into melody. Every generation finds something different in her. The scholar, the strategist, the lover, the survivor. The arguments no longer matter. The endurance does. Cleopatra becomes a language of resilience, spoken whenever someone refuses to be forgotten. In Cairo, a student working late on a research paper pauses to read an ancient quotation she has copied. The wise learn to see the path and still choose how to walk it. The words came from an astronomer's account of a young queen who once studied the stars. The student leans back in her chair, smiling faintly. She whispers, "Still choosing." N.W. Night falls over Egypt. The desert glows with moonlight. The Nile flows dark and calm. Farmers in Upper Egypt sit outside their homes, the air thick with the scent of baked bread and smoke. An old man tells his grandchildren a story before bed. He does not mention Rome or battle or the asp. He says only, there was a woman who loved her country so much that she taught it to outlive her. The children listen, eyes wide, until the youngest asks, "What was her name?" He smiles, "Cleopatra." Eduan? The syllables float upward, join the murmur of insects, and vanish into the night like sparks. Far away, in a city of glass towers and neon, an artist paints late into the morning. She has never seen the Nile except in photographs, yet something in its shape calls to her. On her canvas, she draws a face emerging from ripples of blue and gold. She titles the work, "The Whisper of the River." When the painting is finished, she sits before it, exhausted and calm, certain she has borrowed someone else's memory. In every corner of the modern world, pieces of Cleopatra survive. A statue in a museum, a line of verse, a perfume whose recipe still stirs on paper. Each fragment hums with the same undertone, the sound of a mind that refused to surrender wonder. That is her true immortality. Not the crown, not the war, but the insistence that curiosity itself is sacred. When the wind rises over Alexandria's harbor, it carries the mingled scents of salt and diesel and something faintly floral, like lotus. The lighthouse beam sweeps once more across the dark water. For an instant, its reflection forms a narrow band of gold, a line that stretches all the way toward the open sea. Some say it is only light. Others, listening carefully, hear a voice threaded through the surf, low and certain. "I am still here." The wave breaks, and the voice dissolves into foam. But the feeling remains, the sense that the past is never past, that the queen who once watched the stars still watches the river, that the story still wants to be told. When dawn returns, fishermen untie their boats. The river glows silver, the air smells of wet rope and coffee. One of them hums an old tune as he pushes away from the dock. The melody is ancient, older than the language he sings it in. Its words have changed over centuries, yet its meaning endures. Knowledge endures. Beauty endures. Egypt endures. The sun rises. The oars dip. The water folds around them and moves on, carrying everything, names, memories, light forward into another day. There are some stories that never end. They simply change their voice. Cleopatra's is one of them. When the river finally swallowed the last stones of her palace, the world did not go silent. The story merely crossed borders, trading papyrus for parchment, ink for paint, and temples for theaters. In the centuries after her death, Egypt became a chapter in Rome's vast book. Yet within that empire, the memory of its last queen lingered like perfume. Roman women copied the tilt of her hair, the curve of her eyeliner. Philosophers invoked her name as an example of intellect corrupted by passion, while poets invoked it as passion elevated by intellect. Even in the markets of Rome, perfume sellers whispered, "The queen's scent," and every buyer believed it. One of those poets, Lucan, wrote, "Her courage burned brighter than the ships she set aflame." He meant it as criticism, yet the line traveled farther than his intent, surviving in recitations and echoes. Listeners forgot the judgment and remembered only the fire. As the centuries turned, the old empire fractured, and new worlds rose upon its dust. Christianity spread through the Mediterranean, carrying its own retelling of morality and redemption. Yet even among the saints' legends, Cleopatra's image endured, transformed but recognizable. Medieval chroniclers called her the pagan queen who sought wisdom. Monks in scriptoriums copied fragments of her story beside the lives of saints, sometimes warning against vanity, sometimes admiring her courage. In illuminated manuscripts, she appears draped not in gold but in blue, the color of contemplation. Her death becomes allegory, not defeat, but release from worldly illusions. The serpent becomes a symbol of knowledge regained. The artists who painted her may never have seen the Nile, but in their imagination it shimmered behind her like eternity. A nun in a convent near Florence, copying such an image around the year 900, pauses over the face she is painting. The candlelight flickers across her brush. "She looks like she's listening," the nun whispers. Her fellow sisters smile, amused. "To what?" one asks. "To time," she answers, and continues painting. By the dawn of the Renaissance, the world remembers Cleopatra not as warning but as wonder. The rediscovery of classical learning turns her into muse again. Scholars translate Greek histories into Latin and Italian. Artists sketch her profile from coins dug out of the ground. In Florence, Leonardo writes in his notebook, "The human face is the map of the soul." Among his sketches is one labeled simply, "Egyptian Queen," a thoughtful gaze, a faint smile, eyes that seem to ask and answer at once. Painters in Venice and poets in England make her their subject. She becomes the embodiment of the union they all seek: art and intellect, reason and beauty, courage and doubt. When Shakespeare finally sets quill to paper, he gives her words that will last longer than marble. Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety. The line captures something no historian ever could: the sense that she is both real and mythic, mortal and endless. The audiences of Elizabethan London, sitting in the flicker of torchlight, see in her their own queen's reflection, and in Antony, their own temptations. The stage becomes a mirror, and through it Cleopatra returns to life, not as relic, but as presence. Centuries roll on. In Baroque paintings she reclines beneath rich fabrics, jeweled and composed, the asp of faint detail at her wrist. To the painters she represents the sublime moment when power meets fate. To their patrons she is both warning and desire. In every version her gaze changes, sometimes proud, sometimes serene, sometimes almost forgiving. None of them look quite like the others, yet all are her. Each brushstroke adds another heartbeat to the legend. Across Europe, her name becomes a shorthand for allure, intelligence, danger, and grace. Perfume houses name their blends after her. Composers write operas about her. Scientists name flowers and moons for her. A French astronomer, peering through his telescope in 1777, records a faint new body near Venus and calls it Cleopatra's tear. The tear turns out to be nothing but starlight, but the name remains. Meanwhile, in Egypt itself, the ruins sleep under the sand. Villages grow over what was once royal ground. Children play beside columns carved with half-visible hieroglyphs. At dusk, as their mothers call them home, the columns glow with the same light that once touched her face. No one speaks her name aloud, but the rhythm of her language lingers in lullabies and proverbs. One grandmother tells her granddaughter, "Remember, my little one, the river is patient. It forgets nothing." The child nods without understanding that she is hearing Cleopatra's truest epitaph. By the 19th century, the West rediscovers Egypt with a fever that borders on devotion. Scholars, soldiers, and dreamers pour across the Mediterranean, chasing sand-blown myths of gold and gods. When Napoleon's expedition lands in Alexandria, his scientists marvel at the shattered columns and half-buried temples. They name everything they see in French, but one name needs no translation: Cleopatra. In the notebooks of those explorers, her story returns to life in the cool ink of observation. They search for her tomb, her palace, her signature in stone. They never find her, yet the absence becomes part of the spell. Painters imagine her draped in linen and jewels, her eyes outlined in kohl. Poets describe her as both queen and question. Was she love or intellect, they ask? Was she Egypt or eternity? Europe listens, enchanted. A world tired of kings and revolutions finds comfort in a queen who ruled by persuasion. In candlelit salons, women wear serpentine bracelets, and recite Byron's verses about the dark-eyed sovereign of the Nile. On stage, actresses play her with sighs and silk. Audiences applaud not tragedy but glamour. Cleopatra becomes less a person than a constellation of desires, the symbol of the mysterious East seen through Western dreams. Yet Egypt herself is not dreaming. The country watches these travelers with quiet curiosity. In Cairo, scholars at Al-Azhar debate the old languages, rediscovering the science of their ancestors. When they speak of Cleopatra, they call her by her Arabic name Kilubatra, and remind their students that she was not merely beautiful but learned that she spoke the tongues of diplomacy and medicine alike. For them, she represents the continuity of knowledge, proof that Egypt's intellect did not end with the pyramids. One evening, a teacher holds up a coin newly unearthed by a French archaeologist. The metal glints under lamplight, the queen's profile still sharp. They call her Greek, he says, but her mind was Egyptian. She studied here, under our stars. The students lean closer, eyes bright. It is the first time some of them have seen their history shine. By the time film cameras arrive in the early 20th century, the legend has reached every corner of the world. Silent films cast her as temptress or prophetess, tragic heroine or cunning spy. Each portrayal adds a new shade to her endless palette. In 1934, a young actress named Claudette Colbert lies on a silver barge while studio lights shimmer like water above her. The scene recreates the moment Cleopatra sailed to meet Caesar, but this time the Nile is a Hollywood set and the musicians are cellos. The movie ends, the credits roll, and audiences in New York, Paris, and Cairo weep for a queen who died 2,000 years ago, yet somehow still breathes in celluloid. The newspapers call it the return of Cleopatra. They are more right than they know. In Egypt, independence stirs. A new generation looks backward not to worship but to remember. Writers, poets, and filmmakers reclaim the queen from foreign myth, telling her story in their own language. In classrooms, teachers describe her as the first modern stateswoman, a ruler who balanced culture and diplomacy. She did not lose Egypt, one historian writes. She kept it alive inside the world's imagination. Juta. On the banks of the Nile, women discuss her courage while fetching water, comparing her defiance to their own quiet endurance. She was one of us, an old woman says, straightening her back against the Sunday. She spoke, and the world listened. The words ripple outward through generations like the current itself. In 1963, another version of Cleopatra glitters across cinema screens. Elizabeth Taylor, crowned in gold and turquoise, walks through sets built to resemble the lost city. Her eyes catch the camera like twin torches. Her voice fills the darkened theaters. To some, she is Hollywood spectacle. To others, she is the echo of the ancient queen reclaiming her story in a new century. The film costs more than most nations could afford, yet the audience sits spellbound, chasing once again the mystery of a woman who refuses to vanish. After the premiere, an Egyptian journalist writes, "They think they have recreated her, but she was never gone. She lives every time a woman decides her own destiny." The line appears in a newspaper, then on posters, then on the lips of university students marching for equality. The queen who once ruled with words now speaks through ink and courage. In the decades that follow, artists continue to reinvent her. Painters depict her with Afrocentric features. Sculptors carve her in minimalist stone. Musicians weave her name into songs about power and grace. She becomes the eternal metaphor for resilience, for intellect, for the blending of cultures. Some scholars call her the first symbol of global identity, a figure who belonged to many worlds and yet remained her own. In museum exhibits from London to Los Angeles, her image greets visitors through glass. The curve of a cheek, the tilt of a crown, the gaze of someone still thinking. Tourists lean closer, whispering without knowing why. The guides tell them dates and facts, but what lingers is the feeling that she is not looking at the past, but at them asking, "And what will you do with your world?" By the end of the 20th century, Cleopatra's name has become a language of its own. It appears in perfume bottles, novels, songs, and satellite missions. Each time someone says it whispered, sung, printed, it carries centuries of longing, intellect, and defiance. Few other names have traveled so far, or meant so many things to so many hearts. In 1998, archaeologists diving near the harbor of Alexandria discover fragments of her lost world. Beneath the waves they find pillars, sphinxes, and coins bearing her likeness. Cameras capture the artifacts as they are lifted from the seabed, glistening like new stars. Watching on television, people around the world hold their breath. For a few moments, the barrier between myth and history seems to dissolve. The voice that had lived in imagination alone suddenly feels tangible again. One of the divers, a young woman from Cairo, surfaces with a small piece of marble in her hand. "She is still here," she whispers, not to the cameras but to the sea. The water laps against her arm as if in reply. When the footage airs that evening, millions feel the same quiet thrill. History, breathing. In the early years of the new millennium, technology turns Cleopatra into something even more fluid. Digital artists project her face onto museum walls. Scholars reconstruct her palace in virtual space. Musicians sample lines from ancient Greek texts and mix them into electronic beats. In the glowing dark of clubs and exhibitions, her silhouette appears again half history, half hologram. Young people who had never read her story find themselves surrounded by it, dancing in its light. At one such installation in Berlin, a visitor records a line from the soundtrack on her phone. The river remembers every name. She doesn't know it comes from an Egyptian proverb, whispered centuries ago. She posts it online, and within days it becomes a digital mantra used by thousands of people who have never seen the Nile. The story flows again, this time through circuits and screens. In classrooms, professors teach Cleopatra not as myth but as mirror. She becomes a way to talk about the blending of cultures, the meeting of science and art, the tension between perception and truth. A student raises her hand and says, "Maybe Cleopatra isn't a person anymore. Maybe she's an idea. The idea that knowledge and emotion can live in the same heart." The professor nods. That may be the closest definition of civilization. Endar. Outside that lecture hall, a mural covers a university wall. A woman's face made of swirling calligraphy, half hieroglyph, half graffiti. Across her crown are painted the words, "Still she speaks." The students pass beneath it each morning without realizing they are walking through a doorway in time. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the search for her tomb continues. Archaeologists dig in the desert outside Alexandria, in the temple of Taposiris Magna, where the limestone smells of dust and salt. Each new trench reveals amulets, pottery, small statues of Isis and Osiris. "We are close," the lead archaeologist says, brushing sand from an inscription. She is near. Journalists record the moment, and once again the world waits with bated breath. Even if they never find the tomb, the act of searching keeps her alive. Hope itself becomes part of her story. At night the team camps beside the ruins. The wind slides over the dunes like a whisper. Someone hums a tune from an old film. Another joins softly. Above them, the stars hang cold and bright, the same constellations Cleopatra once traced from her palace balcony. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of the sea, and for a heartbeat, every sound seems to pause. It feels as if the world is listening too. Far beyond Egypt, in cities that never sleep, people still find her in their own reflections. A novelist in New York writes a story about a modern scientist who dreams of Cleopatra every night, not as queen but as colleague, arguing with her about the stars. A poet in Lagos composes verses comparing the Nile to the Niger, both mothers of memory. A filmmaker in Seoul shoots a scene where a young girl practices a speech about Cleopatra in a classroom, her voice trembling with admiration. The queen has become an inheritance shared by everyone who has ever dared to imagine beyond their borders. Her empire now spans not land, but inspiration. As the century advances, climate and time erode the ruins, but the story grows lighter, freer. It travels through voices rather than stones, through art rather than monuments. Egypt itself carries this paradox gracefully, a land both ancient and forever young. On the steps of the modern library in Alexandria, the walls are carved with letters from every language on earth. Among them, scholars have engraved one word from the past Cleopatra, not to claim ownership, but to acknowledge continuity. At sunset, when the glass fade turns gold, her name glows faintly across the surface. Students sit on the steps reading, chatting, taking pictures. They do not see her face, but if you listen closely, you can hear her presence in the rhythm of pages turning. The whisper of knowledge passing from hand to hand that is her truest legacy. Night folds over the Mediterranean with its usual calm, and the harbor lights of Alexandria shimmer like a necklace laid on dark silk. From the new library's terrace, the sea looks infinite again, its surface restless, with the same pulse that once carried Cleopatra's ships. The world has changed beyond measure cars, satellites, electric hums, but in the hush between sounds, the city still breathes with the same rhythm as the old river. A tour guide finishes his last group of the day and lingers by the rail. He stares out toward the invisible ruins of the old palace under the water. "You know," he tells a colleague, "my grandmother said the queen still walks down there when the moon is full." They laugh quietly, but neither of them moves for a long time. Some stories are truer than the facts that replace them. Inside the library, students stay late, their screens glowing like lanterns. One of them is writing a paper on how ancient women rulers are portrayed in modern media. She pauses to stretch and glance out the window. The reflection on the glass merges her own face with the night beyond, and for a moment she imagines Cleopatra sitting beside her, amused and curious. She whispers, "What would you think of all this?" The imagined queen smiles in silence, and the student returns to typing with renewed focus. When she finishes her essay, she ends with a line she doesn't quite remember inventing. Cleopatra's true kingdom is thought itself the space between knowing and dreaming. The words sound too perfect to have come from her, but she leaves them there, a quiet gift to history. Far away, in a museum in London, a curator closes up for the night. She moves through the darkened halls with the careful grace of someone walking through memory. In one glass case rests a small bronze bust of Cleopatra, nose missing, crown chipped, eyes unbroken. The curator stops, touching the case lightly with her fingertips. "You're older than every map we have," she murmurs. "And still they argue about who you were." The silence seems to answer with the soft hum of the air vents. She smiles, switches off the light, and leaves the hall bathed in shadow. The queen remains, gazing forever forward. Across the ocean, on a brightly lit stage in New York, a new play opens. The River's Memory. It tells Cleopatra's story through dance and voice, blending ancient languages with jazz. The audience sits mesmerized as the lead performer moves through light that ripples like water. Her last line fills the theater. "I am not gone. I am every question you still ask." The crowd rises in applause, but for a heartbeat afterward, no one speaks. It is the silence of recognition, the realization that they have not just watched history but touched it. In Egypt, the archaeologists at Taposiris Magna continue their careful digging. One evening, a storm forces them to stop early. The sky turns red with dust. The desert hums. As the team packs their tools, one of them looks back at the half-excavated temple and says softly, "Maybe she doesn't want to be found." Another replies, "Or maybe she wants to remind us that finding is not the point." They laugh, but later that night, lying awake in their tents, the words feel wise. Outside, the wind smooths the sand as it has for millennia, erasing footprints, reshaping the surface. Underneath, the stones wait in patient silence, their carvings faint but indelible. The desert remembers even when it appears to forget. When dawn returns, fishermen on the Nile prepare their nets. The air smells of river mud and fresh bread. One of them hums an old melody without knowing its age. His daughter, helping beside him, asks, "Who made that song?" He smiles. "No one knows. Maybe the river did." She laughs, echoing the sound across the water. The sun climbs higher, touching the ripples with gold, and for a moment the light forms the faint outline of a woman's crown before dispersing into glitter. In this way, Cleopatra's story continues, not as history locked in books, but as motion, as breath. She exists in the turning of pages, the hush of museums, the rhythm of waves against the shore. She lives whenever someone reaches for knowledge, whenever art and reason share the same heartbeat. Every retelling adds another layer to her immortality. Every listener becomes a witness. And so, across all centuries and continents, the whisper endures. Knowledge endures. Beauty endures. Egypt endures. The stars rise above the desert, ancient and unhurried. Somewhere between them and the river, the Queen of Egypt dreams again, no longer seeking a throne, only the endless wonder of being remembered. The wind over the Nile has not changed. It still carries the scent of silt and lilies, still hums through the reeds with that low, patient music that outlasts all empires. On certain mornings, when the light touches the water just right, it's easy to imagine that Cleopatra herself might still be somewhere in the reflection, watching, listening, smiling at how the world she left has learned to dream. 2,000 years have turned her name into a compass of meaning. Every age that followed her tried to claim her, to define her, to translate her into its own language. Yet, she never fully belonged to any of them. She remained what she always was, sovereign of her own story. Today, her name flickers across screens and headlines, whispered in museums, reimagined in classrooms, typed by hands she could never have imagined. And still, she keeps her poise unchanged, unhurried. Cleopatra has crossed not only centuries, but mediums, from papyrus to marble, from stage to film, from pixels to memory. Few rulers have ruled so long after death, and fewer still have ruled through wonder rather than fear. In a quiet café near the modern library of Alexandria, a writer sits before a blank page. He's been asked to compose an essay about Cleopatra's influence in the digital age. Outside, the sea murmurs against the quay. Seagulls dip like silver thoughts above the water. He hesitates, tapping his pen. What can he say that hasn't been said 1,000 times? That she was beautiful, brilliant, tragic? Those words feel too small now, like old coins rubbed smooth by touch. So he writes something else entirely. Cleopatra is not a woman in history. She is the conversation between the past and the future. He leans back, surprised at the sentence that has appeared. It feels as if someone else whispered it through him. He smiles. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he says softly, and begins to write again. Meanwhile, in Cairo, a filmmaker prepares a new documentary. She wants to strip away the glitter and legend and show the woman behind the crown, the strategist, linguist, and scholar who navigated two worlds with intellect sharper than any sword. Her production team doubts the audience will care. People want romance, they tell her. They want tragedy, but she insists. They'll see her truth and recognize themselves. When the film premieres, it opens not with Cleopatra's face, but with the sound of waves. A voice reads from an ancient papyrus translated into Arabic. "Wisdom is the voyage without shore." The audience falls silent. For 2 hours they travel through history, not as tourists, but as witnesses. When the credits roll, no one claps right away. They are still listening to the echoes of her voice through time. The next morning, articles appear around the world. The Queen reborn, Cleopatra as thinker, not temptress. History finally hears her. Beyond the cities and the screens, her name lingers in quieter ways. On the deck of a small boat drifting along the Nile, an old captain tells his grandson stories to pass the dusk. He points to the far horizon where the water meets the sky. "Do you see that line?" he asks. The boy nods. "That's where she sailed," the old man says. "She ruled not with armies, but with understanding. That's why her name still rides the wind." "Ardo?" The boy listens, then asks the simplest question in the world. "Will she come back?" The captain smiles. She never left. Half a world away, in a bustling classroom in Los Angeles, a history teacher projects Cleopatra's portrait on the board. "We study her not because she was perfect," she tells her students, "but because she was real, and she dared to be complex." The teenagers take notes, some distracted, some curious. One girl raises her hand. "So, was she a hero or a villain?" The teacher smiles. "She was human, which is harder than both." Later that evening, the same girl opens her notebook at home. Between algebra and literature notes, she writes, "Be as curious as Cleopatra." It becomes her quiet motto, the spark that will guide her years later when she becomes an astrophysicist, studying distant stars, the same stars the Queen once traced on parchment by lamplight. In every century, Cleopatra finds new voices to speak for her. She exists wherever someone combines intellect with imagination, logic with beauty, power with empathy. The Queen becomes an adjective, a muse, a mirror, She is cited in leadership seminars and quoted in poetry slams, tattooed on wrists, painted on murals, invoked in songs about resilience. And though every version differs, they all reach toward the same truth, that knowledge is a form of grace, and grace a form of strength. At midnight, back in Alexandria, the tide rises quietly against the old seawall. The moon drifts high, pale and patient. The sea swallows the light, folds it, gives it back as shimmer. The wind carries a whisper that could be the rustle of waves or a voice, ancient and amused, saying, "Still here." And the city listens, as it always has. Morning breaks over the Nile in slow gold. The city of Alexandria wakes to the pulse of cars and gulls and the hum of 1,000 conversations. Vendors shout prices in Arabic. Trams rattle past storefronts filled with coffee, books, and the faint echo of sea breeze. On the upper floor of the modern library, a group of schoolchildren wander between exhibits dedicated to ancient Egypt. They pause before a glass display where a replica of Cleopatra's diadem gleams under soft light. The guide, a young woman with a calm smile, asks, "What do you think this crown meant to her?" A boy in the back answers, "Power." Another says, "Beauty." The guide nods but shakes her head gently. "Perhaps," she says, "it meant knowledge. It meant the weight of understanding many worlds at once." The children look thoughtful. One of them leans closer to the glass, his reflection merging with the gold of the crown. For a moment, the ancient and the modern blur, the same curiosity, the same spark of wonder crossing thousands of years. Later that afternoon, the guide finishes her shift and sits by the water, watching ships drift toward the horizon. She pulls a small notebook from her bag and writes, "History is not the past. It is the breath that connects us." She doesn't realize that this line echoes something Cleopatra once wrote in her lost journals, a fragment later quoted by philosophers, translated and misattributed for centuries. Truth has its own way of resurfacing, like a coin tossed into the river and found again when the tide returns. Beyond Egypt, the Queen's presence continues to ripple through culture. In a studio in Paris, a choreographer builds a new ballet inspired by her life. Instead of recreating temples or thrones, he choreographs movement, arms outstretched like sails, bodies curving like waves. "This is not about seduction," he tells his dancers. "It's about negotiation between strength and grace." Oloritad. During the final rehearsal, as music swells through the empty theater, he feels something shift in the air, a strange calm, as if another presence were watching. He laughs quietly to himself. "Well, Your Majesty," he says, "I hope I've done you justice." On opening night, the audience rises to their feet in silence before applauding. They cannot quite explain why their hearts feel both light and ancient at once, but the Queen has danced again, through them. In New York, an artist fills a warehouse with shimmering sand and projection light. Her installation is titled Cleopatra's Dream. Visitors walk barefoot through the space, surrounded by digital constellations and whispering voices in different languages: Greek, Arabic, English, Coptic, Amharic. Some visitors weep without understanding why. Others close their eyes and just listen. At the center of the room floats a single phrase in gold letters. "The past is not behind us, it flows beneath us." When the exhibition closes, a journalist writes that it feels like stepping inside memory itself. But for the artist, it was something more personal. Her grandmother once told her that every Egyptian woman carries a drop of Cleopatra's courage. The installation, she says, was simply her way of letting that drop return to the river. Even in technology's endless scroll, her spirit persists. Hashtags, documentaries, podcasts, video essays, each retelling tries to explain her, and yet none can exhaust her. In online forums, people debate her ancestry, her politics, her appearance. The discussions swirl like eddies in the river, passionate and unending. One commenter finally writes, "It doesn't matter what she looked like. What matters is that she looked back." The line goes viral. It becomes a slogan on t-shirts, murals, and posters for women's rights campaigns around the world. Once again, the Queen's gaze becomes an emblem of defiance, the reminder that power is not only in being seen, but in seeing. In Egypt, a musician records a haunting lullaby called "The River Remembers." It weaves ancient instruments with modern strings, the melody rising and falling like a heartbeat. The lyrics are simple. Sleep, my queen, your story flows. The stars still sing the names you chose. The song climbs global charts, translated into dozens of languages. In each version, the meaning shifts slightly, but the feeling remains the same: tenderness and awe, wisdom and rest. Listeners describe it as a prayer disguised as music. During an interview, the composer says, "I wanted to remind people that she was human. She felt what we feel: love, fear, wonder. That is why she survives." And so she does. Cleopatra continues to walk through our world not as a ghost, but as an echo of possibility. Every artist who refuses to be simplified, every leader who dares to learn, every dreamer who builds a bridge between cultures, all of them carry her forward. The queen has become less a figure in history than a rhythm of existence. She teaches not through rule, but through resonance. At night, in the glow of city lights reflected on the Nile, it's easy to believe she is still here, watching the ripples of civilization move like silk, whispering softly to anyone who listens, "Learn everything, love deeply, and leave the world curious." There are places in the world where time folds easily, where a single glance can cross centuries. Egypt is one of them. When the evening call to prayer drifts across the city, mingling with the honk of cars and the laughter of street vendors, the sound feels ancient and new all at once. It is the same with Cleopatra's memory. Every generation hears her differently, but all of them hear her. In a sunlit classroom at the American University in Cairo, a professor of philosophy begins his lecture not with a definition, but with a question: what makes a life echo? His students shift in their seats. He writes one name on the board: Cleopatra. Why, he asks. Does she still matter? A student in the front row answers, because she refused to be small. Another says, because she loved her country. A third adds, because she was complicated, and that made her real. The professor smiles. Exactly. She is timeless, because she contained contradictions and never apologized for them. He closes his notebook and says, every civilization has its Cleopatra. She is the reminder that brilliance and compassion can share the same heart. Across the continent, in Nairobi, a filmmaker works on a project called Daughters of the Sunday. It tells the stories of African women who shaped their nations: scientists, warriors, artists, queens. Cleopatra is the opening chapter. The film begins with her voice, imagined and calm. I am not your fantasy. I am your mirror. When the film screens at festivals, audiences are captivated. They see not the exotic figure from old Western myths, but a powerful African woman who bridged worlds. For young viewers across the continent, it feels like a reclamation, a story returned to its roots. The director says, we've spent centuries watching others tell her story. Now she's telling it through us. Meanwhile, scientists and historians continue their patient search. Satellites scan the delta, sonar maps the seabed, algorithms model ancient coastlines. They're not only looking for Cleopatra's tomb, they're looking for understanding. Each discovery, no matter how small, sparks global fascination. A ring inscribed with her name, a fresco of her hand holding a stylus, an inscription hinting at her final days. Every piece brings her closer. Yet still, she remains just out of reach, as if eternity itself guards her privacy. A journalist asks one of the archaeologists why they persist. The man smiles and says, because finding her isn't about ending the story. It's about reminding ourselves that it's still being written. In another corner of the modern world, far from the Nile, a young woman in Tokyo studies ancient Greek texts online. She's fascinated by Cleopatra's letters, by their sharp logic and lyrical tone. Late at night, she translates a passage by hand. Wisdom is not in knowing more, but in asking again. She copies it onto her wall above her desk. The phrase becomes her guide through graduate school, her mantra during sleepless nights. When she earns her doctorate years later, she signs her thesis dedication simply, "For Cleopatra, who reminded me to ask again." Art keeps finding her too. In Brazil, a street mural stretches 3 stories high, Cleopatra's face painted in brilliant gold and turquoise. She gazes across the cityscape, headphones around her neck, hieroglyphs woven into the graffiti beside her. Underneath, the artist has written in Portuguese, O passado ritmo. The past is rhythm. People stop to take photos, children mimic her pose, and without realizing it, a new generation inherits the queen's confidence through color and sound. At night, as cities quiet and screens dim, her presence feels strongest. Someone scrolling through history articles pauses at her portrait, wondering who she really was. Someone else opens a novel where she speaks in the first person, narrating her thoughts as stars fade over Alexandria. Someone listening to an audiobook hears the soft cadence of her imagined voice, and for a moment it feels personal, as if she's whispering directly to them. What binds all these moments is not nostalgia, but connection. Cleopatra has become a bridge, the shimmering thread between curiosity and courage. Her life teaches that intellect can be tender, that power can be kind, that legacy can be gentle and fierce at once. And perhaps that is why, even now, her name still feels alive. The world has invented countless ways to record memory: paper, film, code, but the oldest remains the most enduring story. Cleopatra understood that. She wrote her own, and then she became it. Time, for all its might, has only served as her editor, not her eraser. When the wind moves over the Nile tonight, it carries the sound of 1,000 languages blended into one long breath. Somewhere in that breath is her laughter, soft, knowing, unending. Night deepens again over Egypt. The desert glows faintly under the moon, and the Nile drifts in slow motion, silver as a dream. The air is cool, full of unseen stories. You can almost hear them, voices that speak not in words but in memory. Somewhere in that chorus, the queen still moves. Not in body, but in idea. Not on a throne, but in the minds she continues to awaken. On the edge of the desert, a group of students from Alexandria camp under the stars. They have spent the day hiking through the ruins, photographing the broken stones and columns scattered across the sand. Now they sit around a small fire, their laughter soft, their shadows long. One of them reads aloud from a tablet, an ancient poem said to have been found near the harbor years ago. The words are fragmentary but vivid. The river told her, "You are not water nor stone, but both. You will flow, and you will endure. The world will change its names, but you will remain its question." They listen in silence for a while. Then one student says, "Maybe that's what she meant to be, a question." Another nods, "A question that never stops teaching." They lie back and watch the constellations drift. Somewhere above, the same stars she once charted gleam in their quiet geometry. The night feels endless and comforting. At the same hour, across the ocean, an art historian in Chicago finishes the last page of a book about Cleopatra's influence on modern design. He closes it slowly and looks out the window at the city lights shimmering over Lake Michigan. "She's still designing us," he murmurs. "We keep remaking her, and she keeps remaking us." Lemberville. He doesn't know that half a world away, a poet in Lagos is writing a line that echoes his thought almost exactly. "She is not remembered. She remembers us." The poet posts the verse online. Within days, it's shared by thousands, quoted under photographs, printed on tote bags, turned into a lyric in a song. The queen's voice, once bound to papyrus, now travels at the speed of light. In a quiet lab at NASA's Jet Propulsion Center, an astrophysicist programs a new probe bound for Venus. During testing, one of the engineers jokes, "We should name her Cleopatra." The team laughs, but the name sticks. When the probe finally launches, its mission code reads Cleo VII. The scientist watches the tiny craft vanish into the darkness of space. "She's home," someone whispers, remembering that the queen once claimed descent from the goddess of the same planet. And so, even among stars, her story continues. Years pass. A little girl walks through a museum holding her father's hand. She stops before a bust labeled Cleopatra VII Philopator. The statue is cracked and incomplete, yet the face is calm, eyes forward, chin lifted. The girl stares for a long time, then whispers, "She looks brave." Her father smiles. "She was." The girl squeezes his hand tighter. "I want to be like her." The father nods. "Then start by learning everything you can." That moment, quiet, fleeting, becomes another spark in the long chain of memory. The queen lives not through marble but through that spark. Centuries from now, when languages shift again and cities rise and fade, she will still appear wherever people seek balance between mind and emotion. She will be the symbol of synthesis, the eternal reminder that intellect can be beautiful and beauty can be wise. Scholars may call her myth. Dreamers will call her muse. Both will be right. Future generations might not even use her name. They may simply know the feeling she left behind, the courage to question, the grace to listen, the will to understand. And that, after all, is immortality of the purest kind. In the final light of this story, picture her not as a queen surrounded by servants or soldiers, but as a solitary woman standing at the edge of the river, her hand trailing the water. The city behind her hums with life. The sky before her opens into forever. She turns slightly, as if hearing someone call her name, not from the past, but from the future. She smiles. The river glows. Still here, she says. Still learning. The wind lifts, carrying her words downstream. They pass the reeds, the fishermen, the temples, the boats, the children, until at last they reach the open sea and scatter like seeds of light. Somewhere, someone will breathe them in and begin again, reading, wondering, dreaming, and the story will start once more. The story ends the way the river ends, by beginning again. The Nile moves as it always has, unhurried, deliberate, as though it knows that eternity is not a destination but a rhythm. Its waters touch every age and turn, the pharaohs, the scholars, the conquerors, the dreamers, and within that rhythm, one name continues to echo, steady and alive Cleopatra. No matter how much the world changes, how screens replace scrolls, how voices become data, how empires dissolve into memory, her presence remains. She is in the questions we ask about power and love, in the balance we seek between reason and beauty. She is there when we wonder how to lead without losing tenderness, how to learn without losing wonder. Some names belong to history. Hers belongs to humanity. At sunset, the light turns the river to bronze. A traveler stands by the water's edge, holding a guidebook but not reading it. She watches fishermen cast their nets, children chase one another along the bank, women carry baskets balanced on their heads. The air smells of bread and salt. Somewhere a radio hums an old melody. The traveler closes her eyes and listens not for sound, but for presence. The hush that follows feels like recognition. She whispers, "Thank you, my queen." And the wind stirs, warm and forgiving. In another part of the world, a young artist paints through the night. Her canvas glows with turquoise and gold. She doesn't sketch Cleopatra's face exactly, only her spirit. The curve of the Nile becomes a smile. The stars become her eyes. The crescent moon rests like a crown. When the painting is done, she steps back and feels something she can't quite explain. Peace. She signs her name in the corner and writes below it, "Inspired by the woman who refused to fade." Time will keep moving. Historians will argue, storytellers will imagine, scientists will search. But Cleopatra has already found what so few ever do, a form of immortality woven from memory and meaning. Not the eternity of stone, but the eternity of understanding. Each retelling of her life on stage, on screen, in whisper or song, is another heartbeat added to hers. Each listener who closes their eyes and pictures her face is another pulse in the great rhythm of the river. She was once a queen of Egypt. Now she is a queen of thought. As night returns to the Nile, the stars begin their slow procession. The same constellations she once charted glide across the sky, serene and infinite. The river mirrors them, creating two heavens, one above, one below. Between them lies the memory of a woman who lived fully, ruled fiercely, and learned endlessly. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear her voice carried on the water. Ask again, learn again, begin again. The current answers with its soft applause, and the sound drifts downstream into the dark, where stories sleep until they are ready to wake once more. So sleep now, traveler, listener, dreamer. The queen rests, but her story does not. It flows in you in every question you dare to ask, in every mystery you choose to understand, In every quiet act of wonder that keeps the world alive, the river remembers, the stars bear witness. Knowledge endures, beauty endures, Egypte endure. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of dawn, Cleopatra smiles.